Good morning. Welcome to my profile or my contribution to our World Read Aloud Day. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Jennifer Shirley. I'm the principal here at W. Erskine, and the book I've chosen to profile for you today is called In an Instant by Lee and Bob Woodruff. I first came across this book several years ago and thought I would bring it back out for this occasion because it speaks to, first of all, it's a true story. Bob Woodruff is an ABC reporter who was embedded with the troops in the Middle East, and he suffered an extremely serious brain injury where he had shrapnel embedded in his brain. And it's the story of his illness and surgery and recovery, and it's written in two voices through the book. His wife Lee plays a very significant role as one of the storytellers, and Bob himself is the other storyteller throughout the book. I thought I would bring it out because we're back in an era of such serious talk and discussion about concussion and brain injury and just such trauma and huge people overcoming huge odds, and some people not overcoming huge odds. So, for instance, the recent story about the skier Sarah Burke, who lost her life because of a fatal injury where the oxygen supply was no longer available to her brain. So anyhow, let me just read to you the inscription on the inside of the jacket. In one of the most anticipated books of the year, Lee Woodruff, along with her husband Bob Woodruff, shares the couple's never-before-told story of resilience and survival following the tragedy that transformed their lives and gripped a nation. In January of 2006, the Woodruffs seemed to have it all: a happy marriage and 4 beautiful children. Lee was a public relations executive, and Bob had just been named co-anchor of ABC's World News Tonight. Then, while Bob was embedded with the military in Iraq, an improvised explosive device went off near the tank he was riding in. He and his cameraman, Doug Voigt, were hit, and Bob suffered a traumatic brain injury that nearly killed him. In an Instant is the frank and compelling account of how Bob and Lee's lives came together, were blown apart, and then miraculously put back together again, and how they persevered with grit but also with humor through intense trauma and fear. Here are Lee's heartfelt memories of their courtship, their travels as Bob left a law practice behind and pursued his news career, and Lee her freelance business, the glorious births of their children, and the challenges of parenthood. Bob in turn recalls the moment he caught the journalism bug while covering Tiananmen Square for CBS News, his love of overseas assignments and his guilt about long separations from his family, and his pride at attaining the brass ring of television news, being chosen to fill the seat of the late Peter Jennings. So that's the inscription on the cover, and I'll just read you a really quick excerpt from the original, one of the first chapters in the book where Lee Woodruff receives the call that her husband has first been injured in Iraq. So it begs the question for me, the miracle that how our brains and our bodies can recover from such a traumatic injury, how the brain can heal. A lot to be said now these days, especially given what's happening with the NFL and the NHL with concussions. Not to mention how people cope. So putting myself in her position as the mother of 4, having to just soldier on and get through this crisis. So here's another excerpt. I'm starting on page 7. The Sunday morning phone call pierced the quiet, and I jolted awake to a bedspread of floral and chintz in a totally unfamiliar room. It took me a second to register where I was. Ah, right, I thought. Disney World. Vacation with the kids. It's the wake-up call. I rolled over and picked up the receiver. Thank you, I said, and lazily began to set it back on the cradle. I had decided to lie there for a few more minutes before I snuck out the door. Lee, a faint voice came from the receiver, now almost back in place. Geesh, I thought. Personalized wake-up calls? How very Disney. I brought the phone back to my ear to thank the man. Lee, it's David Weston, the voice said. He had my immediate attention. My brain fired signals to my body as I bolted up on the pillows. The president of ABC News does not make social calls to employees' wives at 7 a.m. on a Sunday morning, even if it's a co-anchor's wife. I licked my lips and swallowed. My mouth was dry. Lee, we've been trying to reach you, he said in a low, measured voice. He stopped for a beat, as if to gauge how he would say his next line. Bob has been wounded in Iraq. I sat straight up, trying to process the information I was hearing. Every synapse of my brain was firing. Wounded, I said to David Weston. What do you mean, wounded? He was on an embed outside of Baghdad, riding with the Iraqi enemy. We don't have a lot of information right now, Lee, but we are getting it as fast as we can, and we are getting him the best care possible. David, I interrupted him, is my husband alive? Yes, Lee, Bob is alive, but we believe he may have taken shrapnel to the brain. I tried to digest what this meant and couldn't comprehend it. He was alive. I'd start with that. The rest was gravy. What was an anchor doing on a military exercise, I asked. The last thing I knew, he was doing a story about an ice cream shop in Baghdad. I thought they were sleeping. My mind grasped for facts, searching for what I knew or thought I knew. I was back in the Tower of Terror. The rest of the book goes on to walk you through how she arrives from the U.S. to the military hospital at Bethesda Naval Hospital overseas. And it's really ironic because another thing that strikes me about this story is if this injury had have happened in the U.S. or Canada, it's doubtful that he would have survived because they had such explicit and intricate training about how to deal with this type of an injury that he probably wouldn't have received care timely enough here if that would have happened in North America. So all of these sort of ironic things or leaps of, or things of faith, if you will, that happened, that contributed to this man and this family's recovery. Another interesting part of the book talks about where he was learning once again his speech. And he had 7-year-old twins, and the children were teaching him new vocabulary at the island in their kitchen once he was home. And he struggled with words like paperclip and coffee. I encourage you to read the book. It's an incredible true story. It has a little bit of everything for everyone, from real life events to incredible stories of loss and how people come together. And for me, the big message about this story is the incredible potential of the brain to heal itself after literally being ripped apart because of an injury. So again, I hope you enjoy it. It's called In an Instant, written by Lee and Bob Woodruff. Thanks.